Gene Sarazen was the first great American player born in the 20th century. He was followed a few weeks later by Bobby Jones, his lifelong friend and on-course rival. When Gene won the 1922 U.S. Open as a 20-year-old for his first major championship, it was Jones who tied for second place. In 1973, Gene bid farewell to tournament golf as dramatically as he had entered it, with a hole-in-one at the so-called postage stamp, the 126-yard eighth hole at Troon. It was witnessed by all on television during the British Open. In between these bookends of brilliance, Gene Sarazen, one of the greatest and grittiest competitors in the history of the game, treated us to his genius through his play and contributions to the great game. He was the first to win the professional career Grand Slam, the US and British Opens, the PGA and the Masters. His hold 4-wood for a double eagle 2 at the 15th hole in the final round of the 1935 Masters, which enabled him to earn and win a playoff for the championship, is probably the most famous single shot in the 600-year history of golf. He was the first great American player to make a science of hitting practice shots and honing his short game through grueling 7-hour sessions from every imaginable position. He was tough, colorful, and not afraid of hard work. He played his best golf at a time when Bobby Jones and Walter Hagen were also playing their best golf. He played when Babe Ruth was in his prime, when talking pictures became a new rage, when hickory shafts finally gave way to steel. In the wonderful book, The Masters of Golf, the authors concluded their chapter on Gene with this perfect quote from Golden Age golf writer O.B. Keeler. His confidence is aggressive. When confronted by a tough and testing shot, he appears tremendously eager to get at it, with a fierce inspiration to conquer, with a certain joy of battle, and a grim delight at the chance to extend his powers. Meet the 94-year-old grand elder statesman of golf, Gene Sarazen, tonight on Golf Talk Live. The following is an encore presentation of Golf Talk Live. Welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm Peter Kessler. Our show is originating tonight from the site of the Sarazen World Open Championship in Braselton, Georgia, just north of Atlanta. We are in the clubhouse of Chateau Elan, and we are sitting with an American institution, Gene Sarazen. What a great honor, sir.
Thank you. Nice meeting you, Peter.
It's great to be here with you. What would your Mary think of the Sarazen World Open Championship?
Oh, she'd be thrilled to death. You know, I often sit back and think, whoever thought 72 years ago that I'd be hosting the World Open Championship? And who would ever thought that I'd run into a man like Donald Panos, who's been so gracious? You know, I'm not a young fellow. I'm pretty old fella.
Why do they wait so long in every great man's life to give him the awards that he was entitled to years before? The Bob Jones Award in 1992. What about 1952?
Yeah, but I received all the awards after I was 90. I don't know where I've been the last 70 years.
The same thing with Byron Nelson.
That's right.
He won all those tournaments in 45, and they waited 50 years for somebody to say something about it.
Yeah, well, they're just waking up, that's all.
Okay, well, at least they figured out how great our game is. What would your mom and dad think about this now? I mean, here you are, an American institution. You've played with more great players in the history of the game than anyone else. You've given as much to the game, much more than you have taken. What would they think now?
Well, they wouldn't know much about golf, but they'd be tickled to death that I'd be where I was.
Your dad moved back to Italy the year that you won both Opens, didn't he, in 32?
32, he went back to Italy, that's right.
Did you speak to him after that? Did you
Yes,
see
I
him?
went to Rome several times to do the shell shows, and I was able to see him. He was living with my wife's, my mother's sister. He was over 90 years old, and he died when he was 94.
Well, Gene, they have great genes in your family, don't they? When you were a kid living in New York, when Francis Ouimet in 1913, when you were 11 years old, when he was 21 and won the U.S. Open in a playoff with arguably the greatest player of that time, Harry Vardon, and a very wonderful player in Ted Ray, did that convince you that you could win the Open?
Well, I was caddying with Ed Sullivan at Appomattox, going to the 18th hole, and the fellow that I was caddying for was a banker from New York, and he looked at me, he says, you know, a caddy won the Open today. I says, what caddy? He says, a fellow by the name of Francis Ouimet. Oh, I says, I wonder how he gripped the club. I said, interlocking grip. So I started using the interlocking grip, and I've been using it since 1920.
You know who took the interlocking grip from you?
Who?
Jack Nicklaus.
Did he?
Yeah, he too had reasonably small hands for a big man, and he's always used the interlocking grip.
Well, he doesn't put his thumb around the grip, though. He puts his thumb here.
That's right. Yours was sort of hanging off a little bit, right?
It was inside there.
Right. His hand was more on top of the club with his hand.
But he's more successful than I was, though. He's won 20 majors. I only won 7.
Well, look at the competition of the two times, too. I mean, the both of you were playing against some of the greatest names in the history of golf. I think of 1920, for example, when you played in your first U.S. Open, when Bobby Jones played in his first U.S. Open, and Harry Vardon, who should have won, was playing in his last.
Well, Harry Vardon should have won that Open, but there was like a hurricane came on in the last 9 holes, and Ted Ray was in, and he won by 1 stroke, and Harry Vardon was second. He had a bad 9, but Harry Vardon was a much superior player than Ted Ray.
I know that. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. Harry was 7 over, I think, on that last 9 holes.
That's right.
In a fierce gale to lose by a shot at the age of 50.
Yeah, I remember that, and I played very well in the qualifying round. In those days, you had to qualify at the scene of the championship, and I was second in the qualifying, and Jackie Burke's father was first, and everybody thought that this kid from Fort Wayne, Indiana, was going to win the Open, and one of my best backers was Grantland Rice and Paul Gallico. They thought I'd win the Open, but I've faltered and lost.
Now, for people who don't know, Grantland Rice and Paul Gallico were 2 of the really great sports writers of the 20s and 30s. Grantland was a great friend of yours, though, wasn't he?
A lifelong friend. He was a great fella. I never forget when I was caddying at Appomattox, we had to stay in a shed about 150 yards from the caddy house, and 2 bags came up. One was a Sunday bag. It had GAR on it. Another one was a big brand new bag with a brand new set of clubs, and that was the police commissioner of New York. Well, Ed Sullivan, you know, he could run like Pervert Normie, and he beat me to it, and he took the big bag because he thought the big bag was a big tip. Well, I had to take this little Sunday bag with a lot of rusty clubs and hickory shafts, and I see them coming up from the locker room, and this big fat fellow was the police commissioner, and the very attractive looking man was Grantland Rice, and I fell in love with him. I remember he had white flannel slacks on, and he had a gold chain, and when we got through, I got the big tip, and Ed Sullivan didn't get as big a tip.
Maybe it was Ed Sullivan then who said after that, you can't judge a book by its cover after picking the big bag, right?
That's right.
Now, you played with, a couple of years after that 20 Open, and we'll come back and talk about 1921 and 2, but with Harry Vardon, you went over to play in the British Open in 23, and he called you a chicken for not showing up at a little tournament before, so you showed up, and who did they pair you with?
Oh, I'll never forget that. You know, I went over with Hagen and the crew from America, and I was determined I was going to stay at Troon. I wasn't going to go out playing other tournaments. So they went down and played Lytham and St. Anne's, where they had the North British Championship. Well, I wouldn't go, so they got on the phone and they got the committee. They called me every name under the sun. And they got me all riled up, so I went downstairs and saw the porter. I says, how do I get to Lytham and St. Anne's? Oh, Mr. Sarazen, you have to go to Edinburgh and take the train overnight and go to Liverpool. I said, do they have sleepers? He said, no, you'll have to sit up all night. Oh, boy. So I packed my bag and I went down. I went out took a taxi from Liverpool to Lytham and St. Anne's, and when I got there, I went to the practice scene, hit about 6 balls, and I heard the starter saying, Mr. Gene Sarazen and Mr. Harry Varden next. Ooh, I was thrilled to death. So I got on the tee, and there was old Harry waiting for me, and he hit a shot called a baffy, put it about 10 feet from the hole. I took an iron and tried to play a ball right to left, and the wind took it into the trap. So walking off the tee, I said to him, what kind of wind do you have over here? That ball should never have been in the trap. And he put his arm around me. He says, son, the way you hit the ball, the wind has nothing to do with it.
That's good advice, because you could tear that ball through the wind, couldn't you? We're going to take a short break, Gene. We'll come right back and we'll pick up this conversation right after this. Don't go away. Welcome back to Golf Talk Live. We're, of course, sitting with the first man to ever win the career Grand Slam, Gene Sarazen. When you were 20 years old and won your first U.S. Open over Bob Jones and John Black, did you later think that it came too easily or too early?
Well, as I recall, I wasn't so sure that I won that Open until I saw a fellow running up the 18th fairway to tell me that Jones had put one in the woods and missed a shot, and that I had won the Open. Then I got a great thrill out of it. But I'll never forget when I was on my way to Pittsburgh, and I had the cup, and I was at the railroad station, and I ran into Bobby Jones and O.B. Keeler, and I had the cup under my arms, and he looked at it, he says, I should be playing off with you tomorrow, but I lost today, so he congratulated me.
And with good reason, and you two had plenty of battles down through the years. That was also the year you won your first PGA championship. I mean, that's a pretty heady start for a 20-year-old.
Well, I was very lucky to win the PGA. I never forget, I had won the Open, and of course, in order to make a few dollars, you had to go on a tour by yourself, pick up $150 or $200. I was in Columbus, Ohio, And I got through and I collected my fee and I went downtown to have dinner, and I'm sitting outside on the sidewalk and a couple went by and looked at me. He says, "You're Sarazen." I said, "Yeah." He says, "You're playing in the PGA tomorrow." I said, "No, it's a week from tomorrow." He says, "No, it's tomorrow." He says, "Pick up your bag and try to make that 7 o'clock train." Well, I picked up my bag and ran down the railroad station. The train was just pulling out, and I threw the bag on the platform, ran upstairs and got into the car, and the train arrived about 2 hours late, but the PGA allowed me to play my first match. And I went through the whole week and won the PGA. That's how close I come from losing it.
If you show up late today, they wouldn't let you play, probably.
Oh, no. See, I had to play 2 matches that day. And I forget, the first one was Willie Ogg. You remember Willie Ogg?
I do, but not very well. Tell me about him.
Well, they all thought he'd beat me because I was late and I'd been playing a lot of exhibitions, but I've just managed to beat him 1-up.
Now, Oakmont today is considered one of the toughest courses that the tour players play. It must have been with equipment that didn't allow the ball to go as far in 1922 to have been an extremely difficult golf course.
It was a very hard course, and that was the year that they had the ridges in the traps, the furrows.
They had those special rakes with the teeth.
Mr. Fones, who was the president of the USGA, he's the one that put them in there. But when the British Ryder Cup team came over and they were practicing and they looked at those traps, and one of them, his name is Robinson, he says, "When are they going to plant the potatoes here?"
Never, I think, is the answer. Mr. Founds used to stand behind the second green before a tournament and drop a ball. And if it didn't roll all the way to the front of the green back into the fairway, he wanted those greens faster. They were very quick in those days, weren't they?
Well, he was the Lord Master. He had to have them the way he wanted them. But they keep them pretty fast even today.
Let's talk a little bit about Mary. You met her in the early 20s and, of course, married her in 1924. That was something that you have defined as the greatest championship you ever won, your marriage and your lifelong time with Mary.
How did you know that, Peter?
Because I tried to do my homework for you. I'm a big
Yes,
fan.
I was on an exhibition tour with Jock Hutchison, and we were playing a match at Hollywood, Florida. And that night they were having a dinner at the club. And I was there, and I looked over and I saw this pretty blonde. I had a weakness for blondes. So I said to the hostess, I said, "Who's that girl over there?" She says, "Her name is Mary Peck." I said, "You mind taking me over and introduce me to her?" She says, "I'll be delighted." So I went over there and met her, and I invited her to watch us play the Miami Country Club the next day. And she came over, and from then on, the romance started.
Did you play good?
Oh, I don't remember how I played. I was thinking of her too much.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. How good was the game that day? What about that other story and the beautiful blonde on the tracks, on the platform at Pelham when you used to park the car and take the train into the city?
Yeah, you see, we didn't dare to drive into New York City because you had to go through Harlem, and it was a very dangerous place. So I drive to the railroad station, park my car, and wait for that 8 o'clock train. And I'd walk up and down the platform, and I'd look the girls over. They were chorus girls going in a rehearsal for the Ziegfeld Follies. And I saw one blonde, oh, she was beautiful. And I kept looking at her, but she didn't give me a tumble. So just mind, it's 1922 or 1920, 1980, I'm out in Palm Springs, Florida, playing in the senior tournament, and I'm coming up the 18th fairway, and a fellow comes around the fairway, says, "There's a woman up the clubhouse wants to see you." I says, "What woman wants to see an 81-year-old man?" So I went up there, and she came out, and I shook hands, and she says, "You remember me?" I looked her over. I couldn't quite place her. She said, "You remember that blonde you used to flirt with on the Pelham platform?" "Yeah." He says, "That's me." She says, she shook hands, she says, "I'm Mrs. Bob Hope."
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable is right.
We will be right back with Mr. Gene Sarazen right after this. Don't go away. What?
Yeah.
Thank you. Now I can't.
Bob, it sure is a great privilege to have you here today on Shell's Wonderful World of Golf.
Well, you know, it's always a privilege for me to do anything with you, Gene.
You know, you and I have quite a few little things in common. We played in our first Open in 1920. We were born about a couple of weeks apart. We were married a week apart.
Yeah.
That's quite a thing, isn't it? We married two great girls by the day we married.
Well, it looks to me like we handled things pretty well.
Yeah, we did a pretty good job.
I don't know what the girls think about it.
Bob Jones was one of the great men of all time, wasn't he, Gene?
Yes, he was. I'll never forget what a great honor he bestowed upon me, because the Shell Company couldn't get him to come out of the golf course to be like a scorer. And I had to go down to Atlanta, and I went to his office and I asked him, wouldn't he please come out? And so they carried him downstairs and put him in the car, and he came out to the course. And I'll never forget, he got in the cart with me and we started talking about our lives. I was telling Jones, I says, you know, you and I were born about a couple of weeks apart. I says, we met a couple of girls by the name of Mary. We married in June. We had quite a time, haven't we? He says, yeah, we didn't do so bad.
No, you didn't do so bad. Tell me about your impressions of Jones's swing.
Jones, well, he had a great swing, but he couldn't play as many tournaments as these players today, because his swing was more of an artificial swing. Had a beautiful looking rhythm, but it takes more than just beautiful rhythm today. You got to hit that ball and keep playing week after week. I don't think he could have done that.
Why do you think that he consistently beat just about everybody most of the time?
Well, I can't help but to think of Tiger Woods. He goes to college, and of course the players today, most of them are not college graduates. They go to college to major in golf.
Absolutely.
There's so much money in the game. But take Tiger now, for instance. He just geared himself for that amateur championship, and then he realized how good he was. He says, I think I'll turn pro and become a professional.
It's funny, we have one of our viewers, who wants to ask you a question about the players of yesterday versus the players of today. We have Ed with us. Hello, Ed.
Hi, how are you, Peter?
Doing fine, thanks.
Thank you. Congratulations on a terrific job that you do on the Talkback show.
Well, thanks. What's your question for Gene?
Gene, I'd like to ask you what you think about the modern-day player as compared to the players of your time.
His question, Gene, is what do you think of the players of today versus the players when you were in your prime, Hagen and you and Jones and Tommy Armour?
Well, I'll tell you, Peter, every generation has 3 or 4 great players. And in the 20s was Jones, Hagen, myself, and Jim Barnes and Jock Hutchison. Then came the 30s and these boys from Texas, Byron Nelson, Ralph Goodall, Ben Hogan, and a host of others. But today, there's so many great players, good players, not quite great yet, but they will be. I think this tournament that's being played here at Chateau Elan is going to do great things for foreign players, because a lot of these players that you've never heard of from the backwoods are coming here, and you'll be able to see them.
Well, it's a fascinating concept because you're having open champions from around the world.
That's right. Most of them couldn't get out of the woods. Now they have their expenses paid, and the last prize is $5,000. We never thought of $5,000.
What'd they pay you when you won the U.S. Open in 1922?
I think it was $500.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
The British Open was $500, and the Masters was $700, and the PGA was $500.
Well, no wonder Hagen was always broke, right? I mean, he would spend his money 2 minutes after winning a golf tournament.
Oh, yes. We didn't make any money. We're always borrowing money.
You know, you've had two incredible winners here in your first 2 years, and Ernie Els and Frank Nobilo. This is proving to be a great championship site, isn't it?
Well, I think that within 10 years that this will be a major championship, because you're going to have a lot of Frank Nebelos and Ernie Els coming out of the backwoods, a lot of them, good players that you never heard of. The same thing has happened to the senior golf. Players that you never heard of are coming out winning, beating fellas like Nicklaus, and I just can't believe it. And they're all becoming millionaires.
But you can only beat the guys who show up. I mean, when you and Bobby Jones and Walter Hagen were beating everybody in the 20s and 30s, you can only beat the guys who are around. You know, you once said about Bob Jones, and I always wanted to ask you about it. You once described him as considerate. What did you mean by that?
Oh, Jones was a very considerate player. For instance, I'll never forget playing around with him on the first hole at, I forget the championship, but the gallery, you know, Jones would hit his shot and then the gallery would run. They'd disregard me. And Jones got on the green and he addressed the crowd. He told them that they couldn't move until his partner played his second shot. And from then on, they all behaved properly.
You had a chance, and so did Bob, to play with you in the third and fourth rounds of a number of U.S. Opens. When Jones won his first in 1923, you played with him in the third and fourth round before the playoff with Bobby Cruikshank that he ultimately won. What was it about Jones's insides that made him so good down the stretch, Gene?
Well, Jones was a nervous player, but sometimes a little nervous is good for you. Gives you a lot of zip, and Jones had that. He could hit that ball beautiful right down the middle, but somehow or other, he had his bad moments too. And I think he did the right thing to retire from golf, because he couldn't take the pressure. Jones and I became friends a long time. I remember playing in the Masters, and I'd go down to his cottage to have a little drink with him, and he'd say, "I know you'd come down because you shot a good score." He says, "And when you shoot a high score, you don't come down to have a drink with me."
Did you drink the corn whiskey with him?
No, I had scotch.
That was pretty strong stuff, that corn whiskey he drank, wasn't it?
Oh, very strong.
We can take a little break. We'll be right back, and we'll talk a little bit about Walter Hagen. Don't go away.
I recall the early days when you and I played in the Open at Columbia. We played 4 rounds together, and we walked out on the tee, and we were a couple of club throwers. And we said, "Now look, if you throw a club, you're going to pay me $5, and if I throw a club, I'm going to pay you $5. I don't think I threw a club since.
Well, I have to admit.
I said to Hagen, I says, how can you remember the names of all these women that you meet? He says, I'll teach you a lesson. I said to Hagen, I says, how can you remember the names of all these women that you meet? He says, I'll teach you a lesson. I can't remember their names. Just say, hello, sugar. I says, that covers them all.
Now, if you noticed Gene's green jacket, it's only fitting that we talk about the Masters, and we just saw you mention Walter Hagen. When you hit the most famous shot in the history of golf, the double eagle with your Turf Rider 4-wood, Hagen, your playing partner, did say to you, and I want you to confirm this or not, could you hurry up and make up your mind between the two clubs, Gene? I have a date tonight.
That's true.
It is true.
Yeah.
Did he do that to you all the time?
Not all the time, but he did go into the 15th hole because, you know, we were on the tee, and there was a fellow by the name of Joe Williams. He was a sports editor of the New York Sun, and he heard this loud cheer on the 18th green, and that was Craig Woodhull, a birdie putt, and they practically conceded the tournament to him. So Williams looked over, he says, I've seen enough of you two bums, I'm going back to the clubhouse. Well, we walked down the fairway and we started debating about that second shot, the caddy and myself.
Stovepipe, right?
Stovepipe. And Hagen is down on my right, down on the right side of the fairway, and he yelled over, he says, hurry up, I've got a dinner date tonight. So I hesitated a little while, and I got the club and played it and hit the ball. The minute I hit it, I knew it's going to go somewhere towards that green, and it went over the water, and it trickled up. I never realized it went in the hole until I saw the people all jumping. There was only about 25 people up there.
Now, Jones was one of them, wasn't he?
Jones was one of them, so that's a good time to do it. Between Jones and Hagen, they were witness to the shot.
But you also had to make 3 pars. I mean, the tournament wasn't over. Everybody figures you made the double eagle and you won, but the reality is you had to make 3 pars and then win a playoff.
Well, the worst part about the 3 holes was on the last hole. The wind changed and it was against me. Instead of playing a 6-iron or a 7-iron, I had to play another 4-wood. And I hit the 4-wood against the wind and put it on the far side of the hole, on the top, and the hole was on the short side. I had something like a 60-footer, and when I hit that putt, to show you how fast the green was, I thought I was curling. I walked alongside of the ball while it was rolling, and I thought sure it would roll past the hole, but it stopped about 3 feet short. That was the hardest putt I ever holed.
Then the 3-footer's not so easy either.
No, if I missed the 3-footer, it'd have been off the green.
People don't appreciate, I don't think, Gene, how fast the fairways were and how fast the greens were, and that up until a certain point in time, you couldn't even fix the ball mark or clean your ball.
Well, they didn't have any water in the fairways. They didn't have any money to put water in the fairways. And the greens, they just cut them so thin that, boy, you could almost skate on them.
Do you think that that was partly due to the fact that Jones won a lot of his championships in Britain and on U.S. Open courses, and he felt to determine a champion that those were the speeds you ought to have?
Well, most of the great players thought that fast greens were the best test, and I think they were right. Francis Ouimet, for instance, he believed in fast greens.
What did you tell me about knocking on Francis's coffin?
Oh, where'd you get that story?
I've been keeping tabs on you.
Well, when Francis died, you know, I was. They called me up. They wanted me to be a pallbearer, so I got in my car and drove to Boston and was there, and I stayed all the way through and went to the cemetery. And Francis always kept telling me, Gene, be sure those greens are fast. So before I left the cemetery, I knocked on the coffin. I said, Francis, make sure those greens are fast up there.
You know, I bet between him and Jones and Armour and Hagen, they are fast, right?
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and listen to Mel's question. Hello, Mel.
Sarazen, in all of your years in the game of golf, present company withstanding, who do you feel would be the greatest golfer you have ever seen and watched play the game?
Who is the greatest golfer you've ever seen, played with, or watched play the game?
Well, I think no doubt about it that Jack Nicklaus is the greatest player in the world. He's in 56, he's shooting 65s and 6s. That never happened in our time.
How would you compare if your other two, and you'll tell me if this is wrong, if your next two greatest players are Jones and Hogan, how close in your mind are the three of them?
Oh, I still put Nicklaus ahead of both of them.
And Hogan?
Hogan I'd put second and Jones third.
And in terms of the greatest match player, would that be Walter?
Well, Walter won 5 PGAs, British PGA Championships, match
Right.
play. And he was a great match player. But he played in the Masters 2 or 3 times and then quit. I would say Hagen was a great scrambler. Every time I see Palmer on the golf course, I think of Hagen. I says, that fella reminds me a lot of Hagen. He could go all over the place and shoot par.
Well, it's funny, you played with, and this is such an incredible story, in 1962, when you were 60 years old and made the cut in the Masters, you played in the 3rd round with Arnold, who ended up winning in a playoff 2 days later. What was that like?
Yeah, I'll never forget going to the 5th hole. I hit 2 good shots, put it about 10 feet from the hole, and Palmer was about 40 feet on the right side of the hole, and he putted up and got a 4 out of it. I thought he'd never go down at 2, and I was 10 feet from the hole, and I 3-putted. After I 3-putted the hole, I was so tired walking to the next tee, I never hit another shot.
Hey, but as we go to break, did you know, because you just mentioned Jack in the 5th hole at Augusta National, that last year in '95, Nicklaus made 2 eagle 2s on the 5th hole in the '95 Masters? Did you know that?
Eagle 2s?
2 eagle 2s on consecutive days.
The 5th hole is not a par 5 hole.
No, par 4.
Par 4.
Right, hold medium irons for 2s, for
Well,
eagle
I never-
2s,
I
not
never-
double eagle. You're the double eagle, man. Jack just made eagle. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
golf courses I've seen over here. And I'm sure that the man who wins this championship will be the greatest player in the field.
Sarazen chips up to the 17th. Very close. It's almost in his pocket now. And the whole crowd follows this genial little man up the 18th. Nobody can beat him now, and in fact, he has several putts to win. Greatest player in the field had indeed won. And now surely the most casual presentation in British Open history.
I'm really the happiest man living today.
So I suppose the greatest man in the field did win the 32 British Open, huh, Gene?
Well, you know, that was the time I introduced the sand iron, and that used to be my worst shot. And neither Jones or Hagen could play that explosion shot, but when the sand iron came out, everybody got to play the shot well.
What was the club that Jones used at Hoylake in 30 when he won the British Open that was a little bit like the sand wedge that Horton Smith had given him?
No, he had a sand iron that was like a scoop, like a big soup spoon, and it hit the USGA checked it out a year later that you hit the ball twice.
Well, sure, in the front and in the back of the club, right.
And they barred it. So that was when I was on a trip at Coral Gables, Florida, and was flying around with Howard Hughes. And I sat next to him, and he said, "Pull that stick." And I pulled the stick, and the plane shot right up. And it flashed in my mind, I said, that's what I ought to put on my niblick. And so I put it on the niblick, and that's the birth of the sand iron.
You kept that upside down in the bag in Britain.
Oh, sure, because the British would have barred it. Because in 1932, the first 9 holes, I was in 2 or 3 traps, and I came out and down and won. And I heard the gallery saying, "Oh, have you seen that weapon that Sarazen has in his bag?" So everybody started talking about it, but it was too late to bar it.
What did Skip Daniels, who was your caddy in 28, he used to be, of course, Hagen's caddy, and Hagen loaned you his caddy in 28, and of course you made the 7 at the Suez, and then 4 years later, after having lost that championship to Walter, you used Skip again when Mary insisted, even though you couldn't financially do it, because you were playing so well, you go over, you use Skip again. It must have been the greatest moment of his life, and he died shortly thereafter, didn't he?
Yes, you know, I never will forget Skip Daniels, because when I went over in 32, I met a fellow by the name of Roxy in London, and he took me out to Stoke Poges to play in 18 holes. And so this young caddy that I had, he says, "I'm going to caddy for you at Princess." I said, "No, I have a caddy. I have Daniels." "Oh," he says, "Daniels can't caddy for you. He can't see anymore because he's gassed in the war." So when I got down to the Royal St. George's, there was Daniels waiting for me, and I said, "Dan, I'm sorry, but I can't use you because I just hired a caddy up at Stoke Poges." "Oh," he says, "that's perfectly all right, sir." So he just hung around the caddy house, and finally there was a friend of mine came up to my room, Lord Innes Kerr, and he says, "Sarazen, I've been watching you play the last 4 or 5 days. You're getting worse every day. Why don't you get Daniels to straighten you out?" So I said, "Good, get a hold of Dan and let him caddy for me tomorrow." So he got a hold of Daniels, and Daniels caddied me. The first thing he says, "Oh, you're hitting the ball so well, much better than Hagen." And he boosted my morale.
He must have looked 10 years younger, though, the day that you hired him back than the day that you told him you couldn't caddy,
but
right?
You know, 1973, when I went there as a guest of the Royal and Ancient and the Princess Club, who do you think was at the dinner?
His grandson, who he rode up to the presentation ceremony with on the handlebars of his bike, and you asked the person doing the ceremony to wait until Daniels arrived, and There he was with two young grandchildren.
That little boy on the handlebar was at the dinner, and he was all dressed up, and he felt like that he was Daniels.
We'll take a short break. We'll be right back with Mr. Sarazen. Don't go away. We didn't talk at all about Cobb and Ruth, but if I remember correctly, Ty Cobb was the fellow who turned you on to that little secret or trick about swinging a weighted club, something you did forever.
Well, I didn't do it forever, but he gave me an idea, and I put some weight in the club, and it was a great idea because, you know, I spent 35 years on a farm, and I didn't play much golf, but I used to take that heavy club and swing it, and that did my swing a lot of good. But speaking about Ty Cobb, I played with him, way before the Masters at the Augusta Country Club. And the only reason why I can remember is that when we got through on the last hole, we were playing with a fellow by the name of Arthur Bourne, Ty Cobb.
From the Singer Sewing Machine? Arthur Bourne, yeah.
Horton Smith married his daughter. And I never forget, somebody said to Ty Cobb, "You know what happened today?" Ty says, "What?" He says, "Rogers was killed in an airplane out in the North Pole." What do you think his answer was? He says, "Well, that's just the way he'd like to have it."
Yeah, he was a no-nonsense guy, wasn't he? You probably got along because of that a little bit, didn't you? You were no-nonsense too.
I never saw much of Ty Cobb. He wasn't my type.
Now, you played some golf with Ruth, and he wasn't very good, right?
Babe Ruth? Yeah.
Why do you suppose great ball players like Cobb and Ruth weren't able to take their swing and somehow adjust it to golf?
Well, I don't know. Ruth was a slugger at golf and a slugger at baseball. Cobb was a much better player.
Around that same time period, 1930-ish or so, the year that Jones won the Grand Slam was also the year that you won 8 tournaments. But that must have gotten overshadowed because of Bob's achievement and the fact that he retired right after that. How did you feel about your year and his year?
Well, I don't remember winning 8 tournaments in one year. The fellow that won a lot of tournaments in one year was Byron Nelson. He's supposed to have won 11.
It was your record he broke.
Well, I never kept that record.
That's all right, but I was doing the homework and I was counting up 1930 and
You sure have done a lot of homework tonight.
Now, Jones, did you play at Augusta Country Club early in the season when Jones won by 13 or 15 shots? And Ty Cobb got mad at him for slacking off at the end of the round?
I know, I don't remember that.
That was early 1930, and I think it was the beginning of Jones's last 5 tournaments, none of which he lost because he only really played in the majors that year. What was different about Bob in 30, do you think?
Well, Jones used to spend a lot of time getting ready for the British Open. I mean, the American Amateur and the American Open. He wanted to win the majors, and he did. And he'd give it a lot of time in practice. And he used to have a teacher by the name of Stuart Maiden. And he'd go around, and he had to have Stuart Maiden with him all the time. I remember seeing him at Skokie in 1922. They were down underneath the oak tree there practicing, and there was Stuart there tuning him up for the Open.
That was before the days when everybody nowadays has their teacher that they go everywhere with. Hey, speaking of which, who taught Mary to play such good golf that when you lost the Open in 34 by a shot to Ola Dutra, and you got off the train and you thought she was going to say, "Oh, Gene, I'm so sorry you lost by 1 shot," instead she told you she shot 84, her best round, right?
That was a tournament at Oakmont. I lost the Open to Tommy Armour and Harry Cooper by 1 shot. And of course, in those days, you didn't motor, you had to take the train. When I got to Pennsylvania Station, she met me, and I said, she didn't wait for me to tell her that I lost the Open, because in those days, you didn't have the radio or anything. They had a newspaper, and she hadn't looked at the New York Times yet. And she looked at me, she says, "What do you think I did yesterday?" I said, "What?" She says, "I shot an 84. I said, "What do you think I did yesterday?" I lost the Open by 1 stroke. It didn't mean a thing to her.
It's good she didn't ask you if you broke 84. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back with Gene Sarazen. Don't go away. Looking at you in your Masters green jacket with envy, it makes me think of the lithograph that you have just participated in, that you and the artist have signed. And if people want to purchase this autograph lithograph, the proceeds go to the Gene and Mary Sarazen Foundation, don't they?
They sure do. Linda Hartow did that.
Linda Hartog, and she signs it also.
I had to sign something like 250, and just as I got through signing, but I don't like signing with a pencil. I like a pen.
I don't blame you.
And this pencil was a square one, and it kept hurting my finger. And I never went through an autograph length like that one. I would never do it again with a pencil.
That's why it's going to be such a collector's item, because you only signed the 250 and you're not going to do any more.
No
They'll be
more.
worth zillions one day because of that, Gene.
No more.
Now listen, I know we're going to go home in a moment, and I understand that the greatest feat that you have engineered recently is in renewing your driver's license. At age 94, they gave you a 6-year lease on this thing, so it doesn't expire until you're 100. Can you give me a lift?
No.
What no?
I don't use that driver's license much. My grandson drives me around.
No, well, what are you doing with the license?
It's a souvenir.
A souvenir. I want to lift home. How do you expect me to get back to Orlando, Florida from Brazelton, Georgia?
Fly back with Mr. Panos.
Good idea. What's giving you right now the greatest joy in your life, Gene?
I would say hosting this World Open, because just think of it, at 94, I'm hosting a great tournament that someday is going to be a major.
And what an incredible thing to invite all of the Open champions, from the first great player born in this century and the youngest man, second youngest man to win a U.S. Open ever still.
Yeah.
Great pleasure to be with you tonight.
Pleasure to be with you,
Thank you.
Peter.
Best of luck this week with everything that you're doing.
Well, I don't have to play, thank God.
I understand that you are first alternate, and they may need you, so we're going to hit a couple of shots.
No, I'll let Mr. Panos drive for me.
Okay, before Gene drives me home, we're going to go work on his game a little bit. I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight. We'll see you next Monday on Golf Talk Live. Night, everybody.
ball.